In this video, we're going to be discussing Rabbi Yosef Rosen, also known as the Rogatchover Gaon, or the genius of Rogatchov. He was born in the year 1858 and he passed away in the year 1936. His father's name was Rabbi Fischel. He was a tremendous Talmud Chacham, a tremendous Torah scholar. However, he never wanted to make money as being a rabbi, and it seemed that he was a merchant, which apparently practically meant that his wife ran a store and he sat in the corner learning all day because he wasn't really involved in this world. He was a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe. His Rabbi Fischel's wife, her lineage went back. Her grandfather was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, so they had a deep chassidic roots. When he was a young boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, his father brought Rabbi small Yosef. He brought him to Lubavitch, and he was at that time the Tzemach Tzedek was very ill towards the end of his life, and his son Rabbi Yehuda Leib, who ended up becoming the Rebbe of Kapust later after his father, the Rebbe of the Tzemach Tzedek's passing, put his hands on the young boy and he blessed him that he should be able to learn Torah, which of course we'll see soon became fulfilled. At some point, that as a young age, even seems before Bar Mitzvah, he went to the yeshiva in Slutsk. Slutsk is by the way, he was already at this point, he was known as the genius of Rogatchov. Rogatchov was the city where he was born, and he became well known as this young boy who's a genius and could remember tremendous amounts of Torah. He went to a yeshiva in Slutsk. At that time was the biggest yeshiva, and he studied by famous Rabbi Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik, also known as the Beis Levi, and his chavrusa, his study partner, was his son, was the Reb Chaim Brisker, the famous Brisker Rav, and so these two were chavrusas together, and the thing that they shared a bond over was the Rambam, Maimonides. They both loved learning Maimonides to the point that actually his father, Rabbi Chaim Brisker's father, Rabbi Yosef Dov, the Beis Halevi, did not appreciate the fact that they were learning Rambam so much, and they used to lock the Rambam and hide it away. So one time, the caretaker of the base medrash of the study hall locked away the Rambam, and he found that the Rogatchover had broken into the thing, and he had gotten the Rambam. He was studying it, and he was basically running away, and he actually jumped on top of the fireplace, and he was sitting on top of the ledge of the fireplace studying the Rambam. And at that point, they said, "Okay, it's getting too dangerous. We're fighting with them," and they allowed them to study the Rambam even more than the yeshiva wanted them to. As a young man, about the age of 17, he started to go around Europe, Eastern Europe, and see who knows how to learn Torah. And he didn't. He felt that he was this big genius, and nobody knew how to learn on his level. Very few, I should say, knew how to learn on his level. So he once went to the city of Warsaw, and he said, "Let's see who knows how to learn here." So he went to the Hasidic Rav, Reb Zalman Fradkin. He was a big Chassid, also known as the He wrote a sefer called the Teres Chesed, and he went to him, and he. Rabbi Fradkin invited him in, and he says, "Shev b'ni, sit, my son." And right then, the Rogatchover started to spit out every place in the Talmud where it says these words, "sit," and to sit down. And they started having this whole big conversation, and he was so overwhelmed by the fact that he found someone on his caliber, and he just started to when they found him wandering the streets of Warsaw, just mumbling to himself, "Wow, that old man knows how to learn." And eventually he went. He said, "Where else can I go?" He said, "You could go to the Hasidic. There's a Hasidic Rebbe in this town. His name is Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin, in the city of Lublin." And so he goes to the Lublin. He goes to the Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen, and he starts to spit out sources and trying to challenge him, and he's not taking the bait. He says, "Listen, there was a time when I also thought that nobody knows how to learn, but you have to have Yir Shemayim, you have to have fear of heaven. That's the main thing. And it totally changed. The Rogatchover was very, very impressed by this. Eventually, he also was a chassid of the Kapister dynasty of Chabad. As we mentioned, his blessing from the Tzemach Tzedek came through that his son Rabbi Yehuda Leib put his father's hands on his head, and he ended up becoming a chassid of Rabbi Yehuda Leib's son, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman of Kapust, and he did visit him a few times. At some point, he got married, and he went married to a girl from Warsaw, and her name was Peril. He had 2 daughters with her, and later, when Peril passed away, he got remarried to her sister, Rivka, later in life. But he did spend a considerable amount of time in Warsaw, and he knew a lot of his contacts and friends lived in Warsaw. There was a lot of Torah learning in Warsaw, so it was a good place for him. Eventually, he became the Hasidic Rav in Dvinsk. There's different words for this city. Dvinsk is like the Russian name. Dinnenberg is like the German style name. So depending on who controlled it at what time, he became the Hasidic Rav of Dvinsk. The quote unquote non Hasidic Rav was Rabbi Meir Simcha Hakayan, also known as the Or Sameach. Very, very important Rav, and they got along very well, and both tremendous geniuses, tremendous Torah scholars and rabbis, and they had a very unique relationship. They would constantly debate and talk in Torah learning, and Dvinsk felt like they had won the lottery. They had two of the greatest rabbis of the early 20th century lived in their city. So one of the things that's interesting about the Rogatchover is you'll see pictures of him, and God willing, we'll post a picture on as the thumbnail for this video. You'll see that he has very long hair, and people said there's debate amongst historians and whether or not he was a Nazir, which means a person who takes a Nazirite vow to not cut their hair or not drink wine. And actually, the Lubavitcher Rebbe once asked somebody if he was a Nazir. But nobody ever talked about it. Nobody knew. It was an interesting thing because the Rogatchover was a very open person. You could ask him anything. Nobody really talked about it. So it seems that Rabbi Yochanan Teitz, who was a close student of his, he said that in fact he was not a Nazir, but he had very things in his hair that were very painful if he would cut them, and he didn't want to. He didn't want to get haircuts. Some people say that he didn't want to take off his yarmulke and he wouldn't be able to think Torah. It was very painful for him. And then, in fact, Rabbi Elchanan Teitz said that he actually did cut his hair a few times. And he promised the Rogatchover that he would, take care to be careful and not to hurt him. And in fact, you could see at the end of his life, there's some pictures where he has shorter hair. But definitely a unique figure in that regard. Going back to what we said about he was constantly studying Torah, he had this his mind couldn't stop essentially, and he was constantly thinking Torah and constantly trying to communicate that. And in fact, the Lubavitcher Rebbe once said that actually on Shabbos was very difficult for the Rogatchover because he at least during the week, if he had a Torah thought, if there was no one to talk to about it, he could write it down, and that was the way he could kind of get it out of his system. But on Shabbos, it was very difficult. He couldn't write, and his mind was constantly just working. He studied about 20 hours a day. He had a crazy schedule. He was the last one into shul and the first one to leave because he would run home and continue studying Torah. He was to the point where he would forget to eat sometimes. His wife would try to force him to eat something. He would eat like a grape, and then he would just forget about the food that was in front of him. So he really didn't. It was very hard to take care of him, to make sure that he would eat. One thing he would do was drink milk. That way, at least he would get some nutrition, while he drank. Even that, to remind him to drink the milk was not an easy thing. he had a very open home. Anybody could knock on his door. People would come in and ask him questions. Anybody could ask him questions. Everybody wanted to ask the Rogatchover a question. So when you came to Dvinsk, the first stop for a lot of people was go to the Rogatchover's house and start talking to him to Torah learning. And he accepted anybody who would come. He also loved children. Children specifically would get a lot of attention from him, even though seemingly, you know, children don't have the intellectual capacity that he was looking for. But that was not the case at all. He also received a tremendous amount of correspondence, to the point where he will get a pack of, basically, people would send him double postcards, which means it's like a postcard with another postcard attached where you could write the answer. That was a way a lot of people would communicate with him. He also was extremely poor. Um, so it was, sending postage was very expensive. At the same time, he felt bad if he would send like like a COD, like you pay the postage when you will get it. He felt bad doing that to people, so he would do half, where he would send back the letter. He would pay half the postage. When you receive the letter, you would get half back. But he would write, as soon as he got the mail, he would write all the answers immediately on any topic and anything in Torah. He would immediately write the answers. However, he would not address the person with any titles, as was the custom of that time. People would generally write at least, Rabbi so and so, but people would also write lines of titles. You can see of letters of that era. People would say the great Rabbi so and so, whatever, and he felt that he understood that he would, if he would write that, people would want to say that they got an answer from the Rogatchover. And he felt that if he would write a title, then people would say, "Look, the Rogatchover called me a great rabbi," and he didn't know who these people were. People from all over Europe were writing him questions, and therefore he did not write any titles. And in fact, somebody actually did. There was somebody who was a person who was not a religious Jew, an anti-religious Jew essentially, and they were running around saying that the Rogatchover had called them a great rabbi, and he had to contradict it, and he was very unhappy about that. So apparently, this was a very well-founded thing that he avoided writing titles to people. In addition, he didn't really speak Russian, so his wife would write the addresses, because he couldn't really read and write in Russian so much. But there's a lot of funny, witty stories about the Rogatchover, and one of them is that somebody asked him if he reads the newspapers, and he says he doesn't read the Yiddish newspapers, he reads the Russian newspapers because he doesn't know Russian so well, so it doesn't bother him so much when he reads the Russian papers. So he that way he would avoid the bad news that was going on. We mentioned that he was extremely poor. There were many opportunities that were put out to him to be a rabbi or Rosh Yeshiva in different areas. In I think Navardik, he was offered the position of chief rabbi of Warsaw. There were many opportunities, but for whatever reason, none of them ever panned out, and he struggled financially, trying to make a living in Dvinsk as the Rav there. He did also print Sfarim. He printed a Sfarim called Safnas Paneach. Safnas Paneach is the name that Pharaoh gave Yosef in Egypt. So as a play on words, he used his name was Yosef, so therefore he used that as the name for his Sfarim, and he did make a few dollars to help support himself by printing and selling these Sfarim. During World War One, there was a lot of bombing going on in that part of Lithuania, and that part of, I believe, sometimes because controlled by Russia, sometimes by Austria. I'm not exactly sure at the beginning of World War One where it was, but at any rate, there was a lot of bombing going on, and it became very dangerous because, besides the fact that there were bombs falling, he would walk in the street. He would always just walk in the middle of the street as if totally engrossed in his thoughts. And they saw that there were bombs falling, and he didn't even realize that he was just kept walking. And so his family realized that they had to leave, and they ended up going to what became Leningrad, and he was there for about a decade. And had a lot of interesting stories about that. So he left Tvinsk. Eventually, he came back and resumed the rabbinate there. He had a very unique relationship with the Chabad Rebbeim. We already mentioned, obviously, the fact that he came from Hasidic stock, the fact that he got a blessing from the Tzemach Tzedek, the fact that he the fact that he was a chassid of Rabbi Shlomo Zalman of Kapos, but he also had a very warm relationship with the Rebbe Rashab, and the fifth Chabad Rebbe, and Chabad Lubavitch Rebbe, and in fact, the Rebbe Rashab said that the Rogatchover Gaon gave him a blessing, that he blesses him with his koyach HaTorah, with the power of his Torah. He gave the Rebbe Rashab a blessing. The Rebbe Rashab, and they also and the Rogatchover also communicated about communal activities. Even though the Rogatchover really did not like getting involved in communal activities, he avoided it as much as he could. He felt that he just had to study Torah. That was what he had to do. That was what he wanted to do. He avoided communal activities. He avoided giving blessings, anything like that. He wasn't really interested in. He really wanted to just study Torah and be, community rabbi. He didn't want to be involved in community activism. He with the sixth Chabad Rebbe, the Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, he also had a very interesting relationship, and he used to call him at that point. The Kapos dynasty had already ended that part of the Chabad world, and he became he was never really an official chassid or anything like that, but he used to call the previous Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, he used to call him the Nasi, the head of the Jewish people, and he would say the Jewish people need a Nasi, and that is what he is. The previous Rebbe called him the Sar HaTorah, which means the master of the Torah of their generation. And he, in fact, one time when the Rogatchover was ill, they both lived in Leningrad at the time. He visited him, and when he left, he actually wouldn't turn his back. The previous Rebbe would not turn his back on the Rogatchover, which was a tremendous sign of respect. And eventually, they also blossomed the relationship between the Lubavitcher Rebbe and the Rogatchover. There are extant correspondence between them that we now has been published in the past 30 years or so, 30, 40 years has been published, some of their correspondence. Fascinating stuff. And what, in fact, the Rebbe would use a pseudonym sometimes to avoid the censor of the Russian censor, so he would use the name Mark Harari instead of Schneerson, because every Schneerson letter was open to being censored. They also visited. They definitely met each other in Leningrad, though it is not. We don't have any records of that, but it seems that they did have some sort of correspondence, meetings in Leningrad when he was there. There is also a well-founded rumor that the Rebbe received smicha from the Rogatchover. The two kind of anecdotes about that is that the Rebbe Tzimchana, the Rebbe's mother, said that she had smicha from the Rogatchover, and that the Rebbe had smicha from the Rogatchover, and also the Rebbe once asked somebody what would the Rogatchover write on his smicha, because the Rebbe asked, the standard smicha, people would write yera yera, he shall teach. And the Rebbe asked, did he usually write that? So it seemed that the Rebbe had some familiarity with the Rogatchover smicha. So that is where that came from. And however, any paper or document that the smicha document does not exist from the Rogatchover giving the Lubavitch Rebbe smicha. At the end of his life, he was very ill, and his son-in-law. One of his son-in-laws passed away. One of his daughters lived in Israel. His son-in-law passed away, and she came back and to assist her father. And apparently, this son-in-law had a brother who was not religious in Germany, and so there was an issue. They didn't have children. So there was an issue of yibum, which levirate marriage, which essentially once the brother passes away, the other brother has to do a ceremony called chalitza, and therefore allowing this woman to remarry. And the brother refused to do it, and it became a controversy about how can we allow such a thing, someone to do it in this scenario. And unfortunately, for the rest of her life, the Rogatchover's daughter remained in agona, which means a person in limbo, and she was not able to get remarried. However, after her father passed away, after the Rogatchover passed away, she was the one who saved many of his writings from the approaching Nazi invasion. She would microfilm them. I'm not sure exactly how that process works, and she sent it to someone in America. And later, many years later, they were discovered, and still today, they are still being published and worked on. A lot of his writings, in addition to what he had published in his lifetime. He also had a tremendous. The Rogatchover style of learning and writing is unique, fascinating, fascinating style that is a lot of sources, a lot of source material. Meaning he wouldn't like write out the entire um, his entire thoughts. He would just write, see this, see there, see there, see there, see there, and then you would have to kind of put it together. Um, and very unique style. A lot of what they would call bakiyas, which means just quoting from all over and everything. And they said that he learned Shas maybe over 1,000 times. And the joke about the Rogatchover was that that you asked him that he didn't have a good memory, but that he had just learned it because was always constantly could learn the entire Shas, the entire Talmud in his head in just a moment. However, he was constantly learning, and he actually did have a tremendous memory. They say that he couldn't forget. That was the thing. He couldn't forget things, even as a young child. He remembered everything. But at the same time, he had also a very unique way of thinking. It wasn't just that he had a tremendous encyclopedic knowledge, but he also had a very, very, very unique way of thinking that was unparalleled. And we talked about how he was very dismissive of people. We mentioned that earlier. To the point where, but at the same time, though, the greatest compliment he could give you was when he would say "shegitz," like you're a shegitz. That was like the biggest compliment. Or if he would call you an amaretz, which means an ignoramus, that was like the biggest compliment, that you could be on the level that he would at least call you an amaretz or a shegitz. That was his style. Very, very unique style. And he considered his Rebbe. He considered the Rambam, Maimonides, as we mentioned earlier. He felt that the Rambam knows how to learn. The Rambam was the one who taught him everything. The Rogatchover, as we mentioned, some of his works are still being worked on because, like we said, it's not even just the fact that that not all of his works have been published, but also the fact that unpacking these deep ideas that he wrote in very terse language is still being unpacked to this day. The Lubavitch Rebbe used to many times quote the Rogatchover and talk about the Rogatchover's ideas and bring them and in public and learn lessons from them. He also was, people sometimes forget that the Rogatchover, as much as he was a big Torah genius, they used to say that his real genius was that he was a gaon in Yira. He was a genius in fear of heaven. And he would go on these long train rides, even when he was ill on the way to medical treatment. He wouldn't sit down on the seats because he felt that maybe there might be shatnas, a forbidden mixture of wool and linen, and if he would sit on it, it's almost like you're wearing it. So he wouldn't sit for many hours on the train. He would stand to avoid this prohibition. So that was the kind of person that he was. A tremendous, unique personality in the 20th century. Someone that was, one of these geniuses, like once in 1,000 years. And we merit the fact that some of his Torah learning, some of his Torah writings have survived, and we could benefit from that. Thank you very much for joining. If you have any questions, comments, please put in the comments, subscribe, like the video, and we appreciate it. Thank you very much.